Okay, we're live again with yet another Ask Us Anything session. We have a special guest today, Scott from VWorks. Let me put him on the screen. There he is. There he is.
Hey, hey.
And
Well, actually, I'm
I will
not
let you
on
introduce.
WeWorks anymore.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes, until recently, VWorks. We don't know yet where, but somewhere else soon. Exactly. Uh, he's a guy he is deeply involved with Helm, so packaging applications is one of the area for questions. He's deeply involved with GitHub, specifically Flux, so we can talk or answer questions about delivering applications, CD, GitHubs, whatever people call it these days, and so on and so forth. I'll let you introduce yourself first, and while people are typing questions, people type your questions. We don't have anything prepared, no script, no agenda, nothing. Without questions, this is going to last 15 seconds. So, Scott, who are you?
I mean, we can always ask each other questions. But yes, so I'm Scott Rigby. Nice to meet you all, those of you who I don't know. Um, I've been an engineer and involved heavily in open source for the last 16 years. I'm an artist, a dad. I'm a plant dad as well. Uh, and And yeah, within the cloud native community, I started getting involved in Kubernetes through the Helm project initially, when Helm was part of the Kubernetes project, and or a direct part of the project, and have been involved with that project since then. It's helped me to really get involved in a lot of other open source software, because primarily, Helm is it's the package manager for Kubernetes. I mean, there are other ways certainly to package and deliver applications within Kubernetes, but it has had by far the largest catalog of applications, well-maintained, ways to actually run different apps on Kubernetes. So for example, WordPress, you want MySQL, you want Zot, you want whatever. At this point, you can install them with a Helm chart. And so that helped me to get involved in many of the communities around those different software projects, because I was helping to maintain the stable and incubator Helm charts before they moved to Artifact Hub. So that's kind of where I came from and how I got involved in the cloud native community. Anyway, I also co-maintain Helm at various levels, and it's a great team of people. We need more folks to join as triage maintainers. So I'll be plugging that at some point, or just letting folks know how I can help you do that for those who are interested. I also co-maintain the Flux community and website and some other things around that as part of the project. And I'm also involved in GitOps. That's not only Flux, because I co-chair the GitOps working group. That's part of the CNCF app delivery tag, which is pretty relevant to today's talk. That's the, Argo, Flux, Helm, a number of other tools are kind of within that part of the cloud native stack for app delivery. So they're really kind of under the purview of that technical advisory group. And I helped to start a co-maintainer of the Open GitOps project. That's really not tool specific and focuses on, just the principles of GitOps and use cases and methodologies, and is really agnostic to any tool, be it Flux, Argo, Keptin, Carvel, you know what I mean, KPT, Google Sync, etc. So that's an initiative that people can and are encouraged to join, that we run the GitOps Con event, and have weekly meetings. So that's a little bit about me and how you can get involved and say hi.
So you're not busy at all.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
You just listed kind of like 5 people jobs.
Well, Well, luckily there are other people doing it too. It's not only me. So there's a really good group of people in Open GitOps and the GitOps working group from most of the major cloud providers, from different from like a lot of different companies. Victor, I know you've done a lot of demos with a bunch of that same software.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so you're pretty in the know, and I think folks that watch your videos will be familiar with some of that tech.
That's brilliant. Now let's again start typing your questions. We have a couple of questions. I don't know whether I warned you, Scott, but questions might or might not be on the subject that we're talking about, so it could be anything
That's
completely
fine.
random. And the audience already knows that it's a perfectly valid answer to say, I have no bloody idea. Like that's a common answer here. Now let's go to the first one from Sir Hill. Maybe not exactly what you asked for, but any good alternatives to EFK, which I'm guessing is Elastic Fluent Kibana?
I was going to say, I had to look that up. I see.
I have advantage that I saw the comment before I posted it, and I had to Google it myself. So Elastic Fluent Kibana. From my perspective, at least, my favorite stack for that would be Loki for logs, Prometheus for metrics, and what are we missing? Tracing, yeah. You can use quite a few over there, but Loki. I'm a Grafana fanboy.
I like Loki a lot. The funny thing is, I haven't used a lot of Prometheus for quite a while now. Honestly, for several years. I mean, I've peeked at dashboards, but I haven't really set up dashboards for several years, configured them. But I used to do a bunch of that and collaborate with folks to do a bunch of that on most of the software teams that I used to lead or were part of. And yeah, Loki really gives some amazing benefits. Yeah, you can install. Yeah.
My personal problem with Elastic is that it looks great initially, but later on it starts sucking your memory and CPU, and it becomes a management nightmare. Kind of, it's like cookie eating monster that can never be satisfied.
I mean, I will say that well, when I was configuring those Elastic services, we didn't have service catalog type projects. I mean, there was service catalog. There were some solutions in the works to try to help with the difference in environments. Like you might want Kibana like in one environment, you might want it in production potentially because you want a hosted service, and you're like, hey, look, just host it for me, and I'll be happy. Take my money, and I don't want to see any problems, right? But then in your other environments, your like staging environments, your other sort of like pull request or merge request preview environments, you very likely don't want to pay for hosted services for every single one of those. So that's why you want something with generally in workflows where you want the same kind of tooling between the different environments, or at least something that's equivalent. That's kind of where I've seen that break, is when you say, okay, well, in production, or perhaps in my sort of green or blue-green, both environments, or however you do your deployments, then I'll have this managed service. But in everything else, I'll just have something that's not. So you want to run some version of that yourself. Because like they're mostly the same, but there might be some minor differences, right? And you don't want to find that out right when you get into production. So I think like this is really not as much about this particular stack as it is about hosting. It's just made me think about it because I remember having gone through this in the past with that stack. So I know you were saying like you've run into some problems. I guess I just want to say an alternative point of view of that is like, well, if you're paying someone else to handle those problems, then you don't really have to care about them.
Oh yeah, I mean, if it's I was referring to self-managed. If it's SaaS,
Right,
I
right,
really don't care how big of a trouble you're having to actually give me the service. Not my
right, right.
problem. I don't care.
Right. But then if you want to use that same stack in a self-managed way in lower environments or other environments, then I think like the point that Victor raised is when you really want to try that out and make sure that that will work for you. But yeah, Prometheus, Loki, Grafana, love it.
Jaeger.
Oh
Or
yeah,
Jaeger. I'm never
Jaeger.
sure how it's pronounced.
Yeah. I think it's pronounced Jaeger just because the drink, right? Like Jägermeister.
Jaeger, that was my guess as well.
I thought so. I always thought so. At least that's how I've always heard it. But yeah, I'm American. I'm a U.S. citizen, so I think it's my duty to mispronounce nearly everything. But
Let's say it's Jaeger. Jaeger.
yes. There's Dynatrace. There's a lot of really good alternatives.
Exactly. Now, next, will ChatGPT reduce DevOps platform engineer for setup environment infra?
Yes.
Yes? How? I'm fuzzy on that. I'm pretty sure that we are going to experience through artificial intelligence in the future some changes that nobody can even predict right now. But at this moment, I see it as a helper. It's not really replacing Terraform, Pulumi, Crossplane, any of the things. Not a replacement for anything, but easier way, replacement for Google? No, Stack Overflow.
Right. Yeah, so it is kind of interesting that we from like the early days of the Industrial Revolution, right? The supposed storyline is, well, machines will help do the rote tasks and the boring work so that we humans can kind of put our minds to the creative work. Now with ChatGPT, we've got computers doing the creative work so that the humans can kind of continue with the boring stuff. So yeah, I guess it depends on which of those categories you put in my like infra into, boring or creative. But yeah, I think there are still human decisions that need to be made. But sure, I was just joking, of course, when I initially said yes. But of course, yeah, like AI is going to take over the world and cause, mass extinction of humanity. But before that, and at least for now, it doesn't seem that ChatGPT is going to be managing your Kubernetes clusters exactly, and certainly not in the ways that you need for your business any more than it's going to manage your entire business and your entire workforce and your whole business model and everything else. If you let it, then you might not be happy with what comes out of it. It might be really beautiful or weird, but yeah.
I must say that that's not ChatGPT, but GitHub. What's the name? Copilot. It became indispensable. I cannot write anything without it anymore. Nothing.
There's some beautiful. I mean, there's some really beautiful helpers. Yeah. Wow. Mm-hmm.
Okay, now this is definitely your area, or I'm terribly wrong. From Matthias, how do you handle multiple environments, production, staging, dev, with GitOps?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to do it, right? So I first just want to direct folks to the GitOps principles. You can find them at, you can find the high-level version of the principles at opengitops.dev. But if you go to the it's all in GitHub right now. But if you go to the GitHub repo, that's it's github.com/open-gitops. Someone name squatted the one word, the one word one. Yeah. So in fact, see where it says v1.0.0. You can click onto that, and that will get you into that, that version. But like right here, this kind of shows you. Yeah, there we go. Oh, I think, yeah, if you let's say, see the word system, for example, if you click onto any of these yellow links within the, the principles, it will guide you to the glossary definition that's associated with that term in the principles themselves. And this represented 6 months of work with people from, 60 different organizations, 30 different organizations, 60 plus people or something like this. We have a list of them all thanked in the Git co-authorship credits. But basically, I want to direct you here first, just so that there's not confusion about what we mean by GitOps, because that will really cast a tone over the entire question.
You have no idea how grateful I am for you guys creating that, because it reduced my fights with people that could last for hours, because very often I was in situation, yeah, but GitOps for me, kind of like, what GitOps means for me is this and that, and then and for you it's this and that, and I'm very I behave like a Taliban on that aspect. I think it's extremely important to define what something is, so that it's not kind of like everybody goes for different meaning for what something is, right? And to me, those 4 principles sounds like silly, right? It's a web page, right? But it's really important for me that we know what we're talking about.
Absolutely, yeah. And yeah, thanks for saying that. And yes, it wasn't certainly what I did. I did work a lot with helping to lead the principals committee, but it's really the work of a lot of different people, really negotiating and bringing the I guess you could say the needs and biases maybe, and perhaps just concerns. Let's just say concerns of the different organizations that they work for, whether they're companies or other orgs. So that was pretty valuable. And now there's really full agreement. That's why there's a 1.0.0 version. There's some discussion about adjusting a few things perhaps for a 1.1.0, but ultimately the principles are set. So anyway, that doesn't actually answer the question yet. That was just more of a precursor. So the most important thing, I think, for managing multiple environments, when I'm pointing back to the principles, is that the very first principle is that your what you want to deliver is 100% declarative. It's all something that you need no imperative commands for. It's something that you can simply, in every way, be declarative about. Now, that's no different than infrastructure as code. That is ultimately infrastructure as code. The second principle is that.
Sorry, I need to stop you here. I have a small fight to pick with you.
Okay.
This is kind of I never asked this before. So is Helm declarative?
Ultimately yes, right? In the sense, but there are some ways of looking at it where you could say no, it's not really. What's generated ultimately is declarative. It's kind of like
so output.
Yeah.
Output is declarative without a doubt, right?
Right. Or if infrastructure as code, or let's say something like Q, is that declarative? In a sense, you could say no, because there are actually dynamic operations that happen afterwards, right? But in another way, yes, because the output is predictable. Similar to if you have templating, even with functions within that templating, like Helm has. For those who don't know, it's basically YAML with Go templating, and then some additional library that adds some helper functions on top of Go templating, called Sprig, which is a really awesome project for people who are doing templating work. for any reason. But in any case, you could say, oh well, it's not declarative because there's a for loop, right? Essentially, like for each of the items in this config map, then add a suffix to it or something like this, right? Or something like that. And you could say, well, that's not declarative because it's got dynamic functions, or it's got a dynamic action or whatever to it that makes the source slightly different than the output. But I would say because it's a predictable output, it's idempotent. It is considered declarative, just as Terraform is considered declarative. It also has a very similar output, and I don't think anybody within the community would say Terraform is not declarative. So it kind of just depends on where you want your predictable instructions to live, and which part of your system you want to be in control of that. So for example, sometimes there are even the applications that are deployed via Helm or another method are they have their own rules built into their own code, and they're completely dynamic. You can't say what it does is declarative. It's not. It's a dynamic application. It's meant to handle lots of different scenarios and intelligently respond based on the input that's coming in. Usually in the Kubernetes world, that's taking into account a closed loop, or anything else you want to program into that, let's say a controller, right? But the instructions for that, like your max and min replicas, right? Or even something like Flagger, like your instructions for under what circumstances do I want this to be automatically rolled back based on traffic, or any of these. Those are just some example applications. The deployment of those, the delivery of those applications and their configurations is what needs to be declarative. The actual, what it does is still dynamic. All of Kubernetes is quite dynamic. So really what we're talking about is the configurations for deploying your applications. You have to decide how much you trust your applications and how much power they should have versus how much configuration you want to be able to control it through. And it's all of that, and the configurations need to be declarative, including your rules for allowing your application to decide things based on your trust of that app. Does that kind of make sense? I still didn't answer the question that the person asked.
It definitely does. We're gonna get back to question. It's just kind of, I'm old and forgetful. Just that when I saw the open GitOps for the first time, it made me think kind of where is the line really? Kind of like, okay, so Helm is declarative, true. Declarative-ish, right? But then kind of, if I'm writing Go something and that something outputs instructions to Kube API just as Helm does, is that declarative? Kind of, I'm having trouble, and I know that there is probably no answer, but kind of to establish, there is no clear boundary, right? Unless we go to the extremes, kind of like no conditional loops or any of that kind of like pure YAML is the only declarative thing, which I'm not saying that we should say that, right? But anything beyond that is a gray area in a way, very hard to say where it stops and where it starts in a way.
Yeah, I think it's a decision that's really like agreed upon by the community involved in those areas of technology. So far when we hear declarative configurations like configuration as code, infrastructure as code, and so on, we're generally not saying it has to be a purely static file, but we are saying that it has to have it has to be idempotent, and we have to know what the output's going to be based on the input. If that's unpredictable, then it's not declarative.
Okay, that makes sense.
The templating and all the rest of that, that's just a convenience mechanism for humans to be able to read and manage this stuff. That's why people use these kinds of tools, because you don't want like just hundreds of JSON files that you have to read through in order to change like one configuration that has to match across like dozens or hundreds of JSON files, or YAML files, a subset of JSON, right? Like, it's more human readable, but it's not something you want to parse through and memorize the details of as you go through file after file after file. That's why we use templating. I mean, anyone from the HTML world or front-end devs know this. You use templating for a reason. You're not just handwriting out HTML and CSS constantly, right? You use templating because it makes your life easier, because it makes it more predictable, foolproof, and reduces errors. So I mean, I don't think anybody at this point has a serious. I don't know of a serious challenge to those types of files or Helm or any of that as being not declarative.
Now, I interrupted you big time. You started the second point of the bullet of the.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is that this is actually a very good segue to Matthias's question, right? So I know you're sitting on the edge of your seat, Matthias, but but basically, like, you could give a one-word answer to how you handle multiple environments. You could say customize. That's one really good tool to help folks manage the declarations of those environments. The reason I started off by pointing to the principles, maybe that might seem like it's off track, but the reason I mentioned that is because there have been tools to handle multiple environments for a very long time, right? Like, look at the difference between early Spinnaker, for example, and I don't know, Jenkins is a tool to manage multiple environments too, I guess, right? Like, or like your CI pipeline, like, sure, you have your logic, and you say, well, if these kinds of things happen, then go ahead and deploy this stuff to dev, and if you've got these environment variables, et cetera. And it can become pretty brittle, that way of working, pieces of that. I'm not talking about modern Spinnaker, like current Spinnaker. I'm not dumping on that project. I'm just saying that they had different approaches to managing multiple environments. So I think what we're talking about is with GitOps, managing multiple environments means that you need to have the information and the instructions for what you want to happen in each environment to be also declarative, right? But what that means is if you have an application, like, the simplest way to do it, let's just say the simplest way to describe it, it may not be nice to read, is you've got a folder for, let's just say, dev stage prod, right? Prod's, right, you've got dev stage prod, and you've got all of the applications that are supposed to the infrastructure, and all of the applications that are supposed to live in those are all in YAML files, and they're all declarative. And you could use some tool, whether it's control apply, just everything on some kind of a loop to fulfill the other principles, like while true, control apply, or you use other tools like customize to give you additional benefits that wrap control apply, or you use tools like Flux or Argo or Carvel or something like that to do that for you. Either way, you have to have, like, the simplest way to do that would be, or to explain that to people, is that you have all of your manifests for every single environment in each folder, and you just keep it like that, right? Why don't we do that? Because it's a pain in the ass. People hate what I was just saying, like shuffling through hundreds of YAML files just to find the minor differences that you need between each environment. So Customize is a great tool for that, because you can have shared files that most of those manifests get deployed in every environment. But in certain environments, you want things to change. Like, you don't want 100 replicas or something in your development environment or in your ephemeral preview environments. So you might want that in stage if you're not doing blue-green or something like that. But, like, that just depends on your own environment workflow. But the nice thing about it is you basically, what Customize allows is several different really nice features. But in this particular case, it's patches. So you can have a customized file in your dev folder that says replicas 1, right? And in stage you can say replicas 10, and in prod you could say replicas 100, just for example. Not that you want to do that, but and those can just be really ultimately one-line patches that are pretty easy to read. and you can spot the differences. It's kind of like looking at a Git diff. So that's a really nice tool. And there are other tools that help you with that too. In fact, Helm really helps with that right out of the box. That's one of the big benefits of Helm's values file. Generally, you would have those things you want to configure defined in a values file, and you can pass different values to it when you want to deploy to different environments. Helm file is a project that was a very early declarative way to work with Helm declaratively, and it had an env flag built into it because that was just a very common use case. But Helm itself doesn't have any knowledge of environments. It just has the ability to configure per, and it has a nice templating feature that will show where you can see the specific changes that you made to this community managed or internally managed package for your applications, for the Kubernetes manifest for your applications. And it just makes it easy. You can have plugins like Helm Diff or other tools that allow you to see that. And that's very similar, I think, to looking at a customized file with patches. So it really just depends, and you can use them together, in fact. So it really just depends kind of how you want to organize it. And there's some different examples out there that I can point you to if anyone wants to look at it later.
Okay, let's go to the next one from Lucian. What is the best way to secure application from internet which makes requests to intranet apps? This is a gray area for me. I'm not my specialty, so I'm not sure how familiar you are.
I mean, are you asking about VPNs?
I'm guessing that the question is, hey, somebody from outside my organization needs to access an application within my organization. I'm guessing some kind of authentication then is included there, and probably VPNs that you need to bypass somehow.
I mean, that's what I've always used. You know, you can do horrible things if you want. You know, you can open backdoors and use security by obscurity only. It's not very safe. But yeah, you generally want something like a VPN. Other people may be like much greater experts in this area and know some other cool things that I don't really know much about yet. But that's what I would say.
Okay, let's see, what else do we have? From Michael, idempotency point is a good one. I suppose this is just like kubevela's use of Q as far as being declarative. Yes.
I think so. Absolutely. You know, and depending on the GitOps tooling, there's different philosophies behind them, and I don't need to get into them just now so we can get more to more questions, but you may want to look into that. Where some tooling, the philosophy is, hey, listen, we do everything up to the point of manifest generation. We allow integration with other tools like Q, Helm, Customize, like KPT, I would think, or whatever, up to the point of manifest generation. And then at that point, we're just really essentially doing Q apply after that. That is part of the philosophy of Argo. And it's a good philosophy. It's a simple philosophy. It helps people understand what's going on, but you have to understand that that's where it stops. Just by contrast, because it's the other most popular GitOps project now that we know of, and I'm a community maintainer there. Flux does it takes an opposite approach or a different approach there, where you would have controllers that have access to the packages of those projects, like Q, like Helm's SDK under the hood, like the Go packages for Customize, and so on. And you would actually not have to do the manifest generation physically, manually on the spot. You would pass that information to the controller that's responsible for that. Let's say the Helm controller or Q controller in the case you're talking about. And that controller would be responsible for making sure that idempotency that it makes sure to be able to read and use the features of that tool. So it's kind of like more about like where you want to shift the responsibility along that tooling.
Yeah,
What do you think,
Personally,
Victor?
recently I started moving towards direction. I'm not sure yet whether it's a good one or bad. Of like I use CDKs lately a lot. I write in Go my manifest, and then but instead of outputting it directly to Cube API, I output it to YAML and then store YAML in Git. So kind of
Hmm.
Flux and Argo CD, I instruct them to do essentially kubectl apply. This is kind of like, this is pure YAML, right?
Hmm.
Because somehow feel that in certain cases, I know that some people were asking me, hey, what are you trying to accomplish? What's the current state, the desired state? And I point them to the hundreds of lines of Go, and they say, what the heck is this, right? I mean, the story would equally apply in certain circumstances with Helm templates or with whatever, right? And then I'm trying to experiment. Hey, actually, I'm giving you YAML, right? I'm using this something to define because it's easier for me to use loops and conditionals and stuff. I need those things. But then you
Yep.
get YAML, and the tools will synchronize that YAML. I'm not sure whether I'm overdoing it though, but
No, no, no. I mean, that's a very valid approach, and it's really. I mean, that is ultimately the philosophy that Argo uses. It's a valid. I mean, it's not exactly the same because you're using a different methodology to get to it, but it is the same. I would say the same approach to where the responsibility lies for how to interpret that. Uh, um, oh man, I'm
state.
spacing on a word right now, but I don't want to say packaging format. Actually, yeah, let's just say packaging format, right? Because ultimately, you could, I guess, in a very general sense, say that QLang is a packaging format, I guess, or maybe
Yeah.
a language format or something. It's a format anyway. Let's just call it a format for how you declare your instructions to Kubernetes. You can declare it by writing it out in JSON if somebody really feels like being kind of a machine, right? You can write it in YAML, which is what a lot of people do. You can write it in Helm, which is what more people do because it's a bit easier. You can use QLang because it's beautiful. You
Oh
can
yeah.
use different formats, and that tool knows how to interpret that and output that as the instructions that Kubernetes is looking for. I just wanted to mention that like Justin Cormack did a Docker CTO, gave a talk about GitOps at I think it was one of the GitOps Days events. I could be wrong about that, but I did just look up the link to it, and I'm sending it in the private chat. I don't know, Victor, if you have a place to put that somewhere else. But basically, this talk was called GitOps in the next 5 years, and I think that was like a year or two ago, maybe. I don't know. Someone fact check me here, but basically, the point that I actually do want to deliver from this is that his thought was that it would be a good idea to have a separate branch just for the output manifests. I don't think
Yeah.
any of these tools out of the box that I know of do that as their first line of approach. It's not their first approach.
No.
But it is what you were just saying, I think, or at least it relates to what you were just saying. I don't think it has to be a branch. It could be a directory. It could be a whole other repo. It could
Yeah,
be...
like what I do is, you create a pull request or you merge to the mainline, whatever. There is a pipeline tool that runs the tests, builds images, whatever, and at one moment does CDKs something or some other tool, something else, spits out YAML, the pipeline pushes it to Git and some other repository, right? Whether it's an environment specific or a directory, without entering into that now, and that becomes an event that triggers Flux or Argo or whichever tool you're using, kind of like to do the stuff in a way.
Absolutely, yeah. And then I'll send you another link. I know that there are things like this from Argo, but I don't have the links on hand. But at least from Flux, there's a whole section in the docs called Under Use Cases for manifest generation. Here's one for GitHub Actions, and there's manifest generation from various different kinds of tooling. But this is quite a long page because it shows lots of different approaches to manifest generation. And so you certainly can still do this with Flux too, even though I said that the primary goal of some of those other controllers is to read the language, or excuse me, the format directly as that tool sees it. So for example, in the way that Helm chart is packaged, the Helm controller reads that. You don't need to spit it out into YAML yourself. In fact,
exactly.
If you are a heavy Helm user, you probably don't want to, because then you don't actually have Helm releases in your cluster at that point. You can't then use Helm as a tool for things like incident management. You can't use Helm diff to see the difference between what's happening in your cluster and what you desire to change before you apply that change. You can use other diffing tools, right? So you don't need Helm diff, but you can't use any of the tools in the Helm ecosystem to do things like when you need to, even in a full GitOps, a 100% GitOps environment, there are cases to be made where you need to break glass, pause GitOps for a time, such as incident management or other things. There are some other use cases, right? Someone else might have a use case that I'm not even thinking of. And use whatever other tools you have on hand to take care of the problem, and then fix whatever needs to be fixed, and then unpause GitOps and have that unattended automation continue again. So I'm just saying, if you're a heavy Helm user, that approach has a downside.
Oh yeah, I mean, I personally, what I told you, I'm not doing what I just said with Helm. I keep Helm charts.
Okay.
I'm doing it with CDKs more out of necessity, because
right.
Other tools do not know how to use it and it's not really designed to do anything in a cluster like Helm is and all those stuff.
That's a good point. Customize is a good example too, right? Customize is very much like what you're saying. It has there's no real deployment tooling except for it wraps kube control apply. It's more for the beginning stages of generating those manifests. Now there is one example, which is customize also, or excuse me, one exception, which is customize allows strategic merge patches. And so that does take the information from what's in your cluster. Those resources have to exist in the kube API before you can apply a strategic merge patch with Kubernetes, with or without customize, right? So so in that case, it's not shifting all the way to the beginning. It's still also actively interacting with your cluster. And Helm does similar things like that. It has lookup functions and hooks,
while other tools are mostly concerned only about templating, Helm is really the whole management tool, right?
And I think just
it's much more than Helm template equivalent, right?
Right, exactly. And just in that one area, the strategic merge patch option for customize, that is one exception to saying that customize is primarily for templating, because it does have a sort of a farther down the line interaction. But yeah, apart from that, I think you're right.
Okay, from Martin, what is your opinion about GitHub Actions for Helm deployments? I'm gonna be negative towards it, so I'm gonna let you answer. Maybe you would be more positive than I am.
I want to hear your negative, because I've given maybe slightly longer answers so far. I want to hear your negative if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that using something like pipelines in general, I prefer calling them pipelines than CI or CD or whatever. It's easier for me to understand what it is. I think that pipelines are unavoidable but I tend to distinguish the types of operations between one-shot actions and continuous type of Actions, right? So GitHub Actions, fantastic. I need to build an image. I'm going to build an image one time and one time only for a given commit, right? And I'm going to I'm going to ignore the existence of flaky tests because they're horrible. I'm going to run tests once, and that's it, right? And for that, pipelines are amazing because they are triggered by some event like webhook. You do this, finished, right? When we talk about state management, I don't want to go back to that era, right? I want to know that what I want to have is always what I have, and for that I cannot rely on one-shot actions. I need some kind of loop, reconciliation type of loop, right?
Yep.
That goes through all the points of everything, right? I might need to reconcile continuously from Git to Kubernetes cluster, Flux, Argo CD. I might need to reconcile from that Kubernetes cluster to pods, always being the specific number of pods. That's what Kubernetes itself is doing. I need to have continuous reconciliation for my infrastructure that could be cross-plane or maybe Terraform running as a controller and so on and so forth. Right? I need those things. And GitHub Actions does not give me that. Not that it's a bad tool. It's a fantastic tool. I use it all the time. But
yeah,
I think that we should be picking the right tool for the job rather than trying to put everything. So I don't know whether that was very negative, but kind of that's my. I don't judge people who execute Helm upgrade from GitHub Actions. No judgment, but not a good option either.
I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah, I like separating from one-time actions from continuous actions. And I think it may not be 100% fair to call GitHub Actions only one-time actions because you can rerun them, but you have to do so manually, right? And I think your point still stands. Your point still stands with that. So it could be like, say, one at a time actions or something like that, or yeah.
I could create I'm not sure about GitHub Actions, but like in Jenkins, I can instruct it to run every 3 minutes, right?
Absolutely.
I get something very similar to what Flux or Argo CD are doing.
In a sense, yeah.
But then I'm trying to use not the best option for the job. Maybe the option that I'm more familiar with.
Yeah, you definitely can do GitOps with Jenkins. It's just you have to really do very specific things, and usually the implementations turn out to be pretty naive. Because in order to have a really good closed loop, like feedback that differs depending on the scenarios that are likely or possible to arise, you generally have to have something that's a little bit more sophisticated, like a controller. You could launch that through Jenkins, but then you're kind of confusing, like thinking that Jenkins is doing that work when it's not actually Jenkins doing that work. And if one wanted to write the logic of all the things you could do in response, in that closed loop response, you'd be seeing like a pretty insane amount of groovy code or scripting, depending on how you're doing it. So yeah, and it tends to be more flaky for that reason, because you're not actually, you're not actually able to use those packages. And it's not really an easily shareable or very sophisticated feedback mechanism. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, yeah, turn on polling in Jenkins and you've got that part, right? Hell, run a cron job. I think Christian Hernandez and I have been like chatting about, I think like you run a cron job. I'm like, yeah, you can do GitOps with the cron job. And he's like, yeah, you could just put in while true do kube control apply. And that's true on some level. It's just a naive implementation that's very limited in certain ways and will run you into some other problems. But in short, like to like my like just extension of what you were saying is that like the fourth GitOps principle in that list, which I mentioned earlier, but here's just a link to the dynamic, like the main branch in that documents repo for the principles, is that your desired state for GitOps managed system must be continually reconciled. So you have to have software agents that are continuously observing the actual system state and attempt to apply the desired state. I think that's where CI really generally falls short, is you can have CI in a naive way attempt to apply your desired state, but what's its ability to watch your current state? You can write things like, you can write code into your CI that retrieves information from your cluster, and that's, in a sense, watching your desired state. But what happens is, unless you're doing the polling mechanism in for example, Jenkins, like Victor mentioned, in CI, it's not continuously reconciling. It's only happening when in response to some event. And that is in a direct, not violation, but that's a direct distinction. It's it's really the big major distinction once you get through the principles, is in principle 4 between that and other practices. Because what you want to happen is there could be drift from what you want, your desired state, and your actual state at any time for various reasons. A bad actor, network trouble, some cloud managed service problem, not that ever happens, right? But like many different reasons. Someone who's not a bad actor, who's a good actor, but who just made a mistake on your cluster. Someone pushed a prod instead of stage, or who knows what, right? Or you have an application, right, that has more permissions than it should, and it changes things that you didn't actually want. You want your GitOps system to recognize that divergence, that drift between your declarations that you want and what's actually happening, even when you're in bed at like 2 a.m. You want it to try to apply that by itself. You don't want to have to wait until a developer pushes a change. So that's I think the biggest distinction. So yes, I think in general using CI to deploy Helm charts is completely fine. It definitely doesn't take into account what Victor mentioned about like the continuous reconciliation. And so in that case, it wouldn't be, it would not, generally, I mean, unless you made some like really wild kind of like ways of doing it, like for example, we talked about Jenkins and the polling, it would not be GitOps.
And kind of, I tend to distinguish things between, hey, this is not the best option, but the alternative is complicated, and this is not the best option and the alternative is easy. To me, kind of using GitOps tools like Argo CD or Flux, from the complexity perspective, it's a no-brainer. You learn how to write manifests in Flux or Argo CD or Rancher Fleet, whatever you're using, which is, I don't know, an hour of work, and then maybe a full day to go into details, but no big deal, kind of extremely easy, right? So it's kind of, there is no complexity that might prevent you from actually doing it. And in that case, that's why I'm negative towards deploying with pipelines. If the alternative, like say this is better, but you need to have a university degree to understand how to do it, then okay. Not necessarily
That's a really good point.
Always.
That's a really good practical point. And there's one more thing, if you don't mind, I'll try to be super quick about this one, that often we hear when we're talking about pipelines, we hear CI/CD, right? CI/CD, traditional CI/CD. And the reason for that is that traditionally, I guess, or at least earlier on, CI and CD were considered to be fused together. And often still, they are tightly coupled. And I think that in more and more organizations are realizing, oh, I want my delivery to be untethered to my CI. You may, of course, still need CI to unlock gates for delivery, like to run your testing and things like that, like you said, that are kind of like once and done things. But if you tie your delivery inextricably to your continuous integration and your testing and all that, then that means that every time you need to re-deliver, you need to run all of that stuff all over again. So all of your tests, all of your And anyone who's been in the field doing this has probably run into that. I certainly have. And it's lengthy, it's expensive, and it's unnecessary. And it's just a paradigm shift of basically saying, I'm going to separate my CI from my CD. I'm going to properly do that. And then I'm going to like make sure I know what is in each of the domains of each of the, like what each of those are responsible for doing, and just make sure that they can connect, but that they're properly separated. And so yes, if you're using some of these other GitOps tools, then you've already got that done for you because they have that built in.
That's why what you're mentioning now, which would be a very long discussion, that's why I like to call things like these are GitOps tools, these are pipeline tools, because what is really CI, what is CD, whether CI is a subset of CD or it's a separate process, what happens if you want to test after the delivery, how do you call that? To me, it's kind of like opens a Pandora's box that is very hard to close. But to me, kind of like one-shot actions, pipelines, you execute this, reconciliation, GitOps tools, it reconciles, you can run pipelines before and after that reconciliation, for all I care. And very often you do, right? You deploy to production. Maybe you're going to run another round of tests, right? And labeling those tools like CI or CD to me is more complicated than saying, okay, continuous reconciliation or GitOps and pipelines, one shot, continuous, easier.
That's a really good point, and that sounds like a really good talk for CDCon.
Oh yeah, man, yeah. There we go. There
In
we
fact,
go.
for folks who don't know, this year CDCon and GitOpsCon are operating hand in hand in the same event at the Open Source Summit. So
yeah. Now I know what I'm gonna do this weekend. Write an abstract.
yeah, please do. Yeah, I was just gonna say my mind is a little. I needed to just catch up and make sure that I'm really being honest here because my last day or two has been rather busy. But February 10th. Okay, right. So tomorrow is actually the deadline for CFPs. So does this
So
stream?
you're sleeping tonight.
Does this stream?
Yeah, this is streaming
does it
live.
stream
Yeah.
Today is this streaming live, Victor?
Yeah, this is live now.
Okay,
People are
okay.
watching it. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't want to tell you when you're recording this, looking at it tomorrow, that it's like. Okay, so anyway, yes, Friday, February 10th is the deadline for CFPs for GitOpsCon and CDCon. So any of those kinds of questions, that's a perfect topic for a proposal. So yeah, get your CFPs in. The ones that have come in so far are really, really interesting. Keep them coming.
Yeah. We are almost out of time. We have quite a few questions. I'm gonna let you do the closing if you wanna churn anything out there before we close it. And I apologize in advance to those who ask questions we didn't go through them. That happens in every episode, so it's perfectly fine.
Okay. How many other questions are there, out of curiosity?
Say again?
How many other questions are there, out of curiosity?
Like 5, 6.
Okay, we've got a minute now. No, just kidding. But is there a Slack to follow up on this kind of thing yet, or?
Yeah, I was about to ask what would be the best way for people to contact you if they would like to engage in some discussion or something.
Hit me up on.
I don't want to say where I know that I talk with you. Maybe you have other channels.
Thank you. Yeah, because some of it might be private, right? Yeah. So I'm R6BY on Twitter. I'm Scott Rigby, all one word, on GitHub. I'm also R6BY on GitLab. I'm on CNCF Slack. I'm Scott Rigby. So you can tell I'm not really masking myself too much, except for that one leet version of my last name, the R6BY. But basically, I'm contactable through all of those ways, and I'm in most of the channel, or different channels within CNCF Slack. If you aren't in CNCF Slack already, go to slack.cncf.io for an automatic invitation. You can just pop in, do @Scott Rigby and search my name. Same with Victor. I'm not giving you permission to DM Victor or myself, but if something's very sensitive, DM me. Otherwise, try to keep them in public channels. And the reason for that is that everybody can benefit from a conversation. And not only that, you can benefit more because you're not just getting my opinion. Other people can weigh in and give their opinion, which, oftentimes, I'm not the world's expert on everything. And, that's why there's a community. So yeah, reach out and please ask these questions and we can continue. Maybe, and I'm not really sure what the best channel is, but maybe any of the channels related to any of these tools, like either the Helm channel, the Flux channel, there's Argo channels, there's, who knows, maybe we should start a channel just for you, Victor, just for the show.
Yeah, my answer to similar questions is kind of, hey, just look for Victor anywhere. We end up being in 50 different Slack channels and Twitter and LinkedIn. It's usually
maybe we
easy
can figure it out for the next one, the next time maybe we can have a central place. So not only can people ask anywhere, but other people who want to see the questions and hear the answers will know where to look.
Exactly.
So we'll see. But yeah, that's it. Just my only thing is thanks for having me, Victor. You're super fun to talk to every time. And yeah, everybody get your CFPs in. February 10th, I believe it's 11:59 p.m. Pacific time on February 10th. So thank you.
February, yeah. When is the event? Is it going to? I know it's in Canada. Is it going to be cold or not? That's going to decide for me whether I'm going or not.
It's in Vancouver.
Okay.
It's in Vancouver.
Canada.
Vancouver's not even really Canada. No offense, Vancouverans. It's more like the west coast of the. It's like very temperate, very nice weather. At least that's been my experience.
So put your CFPs there. That's the gist of it. Thank you, Scott, for being a guest.
It's gonna be fun.
And see you, Scott, in Amsterdam and everybody else in wherever. Cheers, everybody.